Welcome to another video with Mr. Long, and we are looking at arrays and how we can display a 2D and 1D array in some sort of grid format. Now, we've discussed string grids, but what happens if we want to display it in a grid format in another component like a memo control or a rich edit? We're going to cover that today. So here we've got two arrays. We've got a one-dimensional array called array days, which goes from 1 to 5, and it just stores the names of the days of the week, of a work week, from Monday to Friday. And then we've got a 7 by 5 2D array, which has these codes. This array is representing codes of people that are going to do different shifts. There are 7 shifts for each day. So on Monday, there'll be 7 shifts. On a Tuesday, there'll be 7 shifts. So that's what this array is representing. And we want to display it something like that, where we've got a rich edit or a memo control, and we want to display it in some sort of grid. We don't have the luxury of a string grid, so we need to compile each line individually with using #9s to create this type of tabbed effect. So that's what we're going to use. Remember, #9 is a tab. So let's start off with the first line. The first line you'll see here is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's the array days array. But you'll notice that there's a bit of a gap from the start to when Monday starts, and that's a tab. So we're going to start off with a tab and then add the days followed by #9. So let's go start that quickly. Now I've got a string variable and some looping variables, so I'm going to initialize sline to nothing. And then I'm going to say a for loop from 1 to 5, because there are 5 days that we want to display. And we're going to say sline is equal to sline plus the value in the array days array at position R, and then we're going to add a #9. And then once that's done, we can add that to the rich edit. So the rich edit, I think, is called rich display.lines.add. Let's have a look at what it looks like, and then we can adjust it accordingly. I think it's not going to display it correctly, but let's just try. So if we display the 2D array, you can see that it's displaying it nicely, except for we want to start with a #9 first before we start doing that. So all I'm going to do there to adapt that is I'm going to say sline is equal to whatever it is with a #9 in front of it. So it starts off with a tab before it starts adding these other days. So by just adding that little trick, we can see that it's already getting the first line correct. So now we want to create this grid effect. Now my advice to you is it's very difficult to get this whole effect in one go. So all I want to do is one line. I'm going to do that Shift-1 and just do the first row of this grid. That's all I'm going to do. There you can see it's Shift-1 followed by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. The first 5 values in the array. That's all I want to get in this example. We know that there are 5 values, so first of all we're going to have sline again, and I'm going to make it start off being with the word Shift-1 because that's what it is, and then we're going to add a #9 because we want to tab it. Now I'm going to loop 5 times for R. There are 5 columns, so this is going to be column 1, column 2. So I'll use the R col for now. So there are 5 columns. So I'm going to go 1 to 5, and I'm going to take sline, take whatever's in sline, and add. What are we adding? We're adding the value in the array codes array, the 2D array. You'll see the first 5 values there, which is the 1 to 5. That's the second. So we want the first shift, which is, so the first value will be a 1, but then we're going to do 1 and a 2 and a 3 and 4 for there. We want those values, please. We want them to be in my grid. So I'm going to take that sline, it's got Shift-1 in it with a tab, and then we take whatever's in there and add whatever's in array codes at position 1, because we're just doing the first shift, and position R col, which would be 1. And then we'll go and add, well, we want to add a #9 after it so we can create that tab. So we create a #9. So what it's doing is it takes that shift with the #9, adds on the first value for 1, 1, and then adds a tab. Then it goes to the second column and adds the first shift by the second value and then a tab, and so on and so on. And it basically constructs that string, and we can then rich edit .lines.add that particular sline. So remember, this is outside the loop. Have it outside. Let's see if that works. But all we want is the first shift to be displayed. Let's see if it's working. So if I click on that, does it work? Yes, those values are all correct. We know that it's working. Now that we've got the first row working, I want to repeat that 7 times. Okay, so just think about it. So all of this, we don't want to display the day 7 times, but all of this that we just did now, we want to repeat that 7 times. So what I'm going to actually do is put a little thing over here and have a for loop that goes for R row because it's row 1, and that's going to go from 1 to 7 because there are 7 rows, and we're going to repeat doing this 7 times. So there's the begin for the for loop. That's for the rows. I'll indent this a little bit so we can see the difference. And then here is where we end that for loop. So that's going to do it 7 times. But instead of it doing shift 1 every single time, we want to do shift 1, then shift 2, then shift 3. So we want this to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Do we have our rows going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? So I can go our row there. So that's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then it'll display S lines. You'll notice that S line is initialized to shift 1 plus #9 inside the loop, because we don't want the first row to be done, and then when we do the second row that it adds onto the first row, we want a completely new S line every single time we do a new row. So let's try and see what that looks like. So there we go. So we got a nice layout. We're getting the right values. The only thing I don't like is the shift 1, 1, 1, 1. I wanted to say shift 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's quite easy. Instead of it saying shift 1 over here, we want to say shift 1, shift 2, shift 3. And do we have something that's going 1, 2, 3, 4 up until 7? I row. So we can say shift plus I row. Remember, that's an integer that we must convert to a string, and that's going to be what S line is initialized to every time we add a new row. Initialize it to shift 1, add all 1's values, then add it to the memo control. Then initialize shift to shift 2, add the second row's values, then add S line. So we're constructing each line, and as we finish one line, we add it. Let's have a look. So we constructed that line and then added it. Then we constructed that line and added it. And then we constructed that line and then added it, and so on and so on and so on. So there we go. That's working quite nicely. So let's try this now with a 1D array. So we're going to use this array list, which is an array from 1 to 36. So it's slightly different. So this is 35 values. This is 36. I wanted to do something a little bit different. And it has very similar codes, just a random bunch of codes actually, but it's got one more. And we want to display it in some sort of grid format. And I would like to display it something like that. So we've got a row, and we've got all the values, 5 values in the first row. And then we've got a row 2, and then we've got 5 values in the second row. You'll notice because of that, because we've got 5 values in each row, and we've got 36 values in the array, the last one has just one value by itself. So that's a little thing we've got to be aware of. So we're going to go 1 to 8 and so on. So let's, as I said, let's just get the first row working and go from there. So let's try that. So we're going to come over here, and we know it's array list. So I've got a couple of variables that we've got already. So let's try to do this. So I'm going to start off with initializing S line. So let's do S line, and it said it was equal to row 1. So let's just do row 1. And then we're going to loop, because there are 5 values in the row. If you remember correctly, there are 5 values, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've got the initialization. We put a #9, and then there's going to be 5 other values. So let's go do that. So we're going to have row 1. And then we're going to add a #9 so that we have a little bit of a tab. And we're going to go from 1 to 5 because there are 5 columns technically. So let's use iCol. So I'll put an iCol there, because as you can see, this is column 1, column 2, column 3. So there we go. And I'm going to just display the first 5 values. So I'm going to say S line is equal to S line plus the value in the array list at position I. And then we're going to add a #9 at the end. And just like that, not at position I, but at position I col. And so it's going to take the first value, add it onto S line, and then a tab. Then take the second value, add onto S line, add a tab, and so on. So once it's finished doing all that, and we're happy with that, let's take that away. Once we're happy, then we can say, okay, now the rich edit, let's add that line that we've just created. Let's go see if that works. So display it. So there we go. We've got the first line working perfectly. Now let's try to do the second line. Let's try to do a couple of lines. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. Let's do this first 3 lines. So if that follows suit, if we do what we did in the previous example, we're just going to put a whole for loop around this one, correct? That does it 3 times. So let's do our row, and we're going to go from 1 to 3. Let's just do 3 and just see what it looks like. And we're going to say, okay, let's do this begin. And this is the beginning of the for loop from 1 to 3. And we're going to indent this so we can see that there's a difference between that and my code over here. So end. So there we go. That's the end of the for loop. So let's just try that. Instead of saying row 1, we're going to say row 1, then 2, then 3. So instead of that, we're going to display our row, which we know is an integer that must be converted to a string. And let's try that. Let's see what that does. So let's display it. Okay, so we've definitely got the 1, 2, 3 going nicely, but you're noticing that it's doing the same values every single time. It's not going to the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 value or the 11, 12, 13. It's not changing. And that's because we don't want to add the for loop here, the column here that we're doing. We don't want to add 1 to 5 every single time. We want to add 1 to 5 and then 6 to 10 and so on. So how do I do that? I'm going to keep track of which is the current value that we are working with. So once we've done the first 5, when we do this loop again, we want to go from 6 and 7 and so on. I'm going to keep track of which value we've done. So I'm going to make not Rmax, but our current. So there we go. Our current is going to start off as a 0. Let's start off as a 0. And we're going to do this every time we're going to display it. We are not going to display this. First of all, every time we do add it, we're going to say, okay, we're going to increase our current here. So it was a 0. And so we're going to increase it because we add in a value. So now it's a 1. Now it's a 1. So now add not our col, but our current. Becomes a 1, add 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And then it goes this loop again. But when it goes from 1 to 5, our current would have been 5 from the previous turn, so it becomes a 6 and does 6, 7, 8. Even though it's going 1 to 5, between 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then it does the loop again. Now go to 1 to 5, but our current is currently at 10, and it becomes an 11, 12, 13. So let's try that, see what that does. And display. There we go. So it's becoming a lot nicer now. Do we see that? Great. So now, do we know how many rows we want to do? Well, we want to go until the 8th row, correct? Or, in this case, we actually want to go until our current equals to the last value. And we know the last value is a 36. So I've got a Rmax array. I'm going to use that. I'm going to say Rmax array is equal to 36. That's the last value in my array. And so instead of doing this for loop that goes from 1 to 3, I'm just going to keep doing, I'm going to do a while loop. Keep doing this while our current is less than our max array. While it is less, so while our current is a 1 or 2 or 3, keep doing this display. The moment it becomes the same value as our max array, we can now stop doing this. Do you agree? Does that make sense? So let's try that quickly. So display. It's working perfectly, except for a couple of things that are not wrong. First of all, there's some random stuff going on here, and that value is annoying us. Okay, so we need to do a couple of things here. So first of all, that row, we don't have any track of the row, and this error is a bit annoying, but it looks so close. It's so close. So first of all, when we got rid of that loop, we lost the rrow variable. So we're going to probably have to keep track of which row we are in. So I'm going to create an rrow variable, which I'm going to make it a 0. And every time we start a new row, we're going to increase our row because we don't have that for loop anymore. That's going 1 to 3 or 1 to whatever. Increase our row, and then we're going to say, okay, now it's a 1, display 1, and so on. So that's going to keep track of which row we're in. So that solves that problem. The problem here is we don't want to keep adding to the string. For example, if we get to number 36, we don't want to go to 37, 38 because this loop's going to keep going. So there are lots of ways of doing it. The better way would probably be to use another while loop here. I'm going to be a little bit of a cheat here. I'm actually going to come here and say only the problem is here. It's trying to access a position in the array which doesn't exist when it gets to 37, 38, 39. So I'm only going to do this if our current is less than equal to our max array. Only then do you do this add in the S line. If it's not, then don't add it, please. Just leave it out. Just leave it like it was. And then once it gets to the end, it'll add that last line and end. So we only add onto S line if the current value is less than equal to max array. The moment it goes above, that means there's no more values left. Don't add them. So let's see what that does. Display the 2D array, and boom, there we go. That's fantastic. And now, last little bit here, we've got a 3 by 4 or 5 grid. What happens if we want a 3 by 5 grid? So let's see if we can do some dynamic stuff here. So let's close this and go to that particular question. So on that button, so how do we adapt? We are going to be referring to the max number of spots. First of all, like we had the max number of spots here was 36 because that's how many values in the array. But in this case, there's going to be a maximum of what? 15. How do we get that? 3 times 5. So the max value, the max amount of values is actually going to be 15, which is the spin edit row dot value times it by the spin edit the column dot value. So that will tell me how many values we are doing. So then current is going to go up until that and keep doing it. Okay. So there we go. We start. And then over here, the column must only go up until whatever the column value is. Okay, which I think is that one, eh? Oh, that's the column value. So that's the column value. So in this case, 3 by 5, this means we want 3 columns and 5 rows. So that's actually the column value. So that's what we've got. So yeah, when we go column to 1 to 5, we actually want to go from 1 to whatever that value is. So let's try that just by adding these little tweaks here and there. Let's see what it does. Okay, so we want a 3 by 5. So we want 3 columns and 5 rows. Let's see what it does. Okay, are there 3 columns? Yes. Are there 5 rows? Yes, I think that's working. And if we change this to a 2 by 4 grid, okay, we should probably clear the memo control. But if we look there, you can see there it is a 2 columns, 4 row grid. So there we go. I think it's working. So that's how we can make it dynamically. And that's how you can display your arrays in grids. Hopefully it's been useful. For more videos on Delphi as well as computer literacy, then go to our YouTube channel, click on that subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, and also go to our new channel for computer terms that can help you with theory. And remember, don't do it the long way, do it the Mr. Long way.